solitaire.
You're slowing down.
Yeah, I'm slowing down. Scott Bauer, who's also on our board, he's at Idle Games, and he's been around a long time. And Deniz, Gezgin, his title studio lead does really not do him justice. He handles all UA at FunPlus. This is a very high-powered panel. I'm sure you're going to get a lot out of it since there's no vendors on the panel. That's one. Also, just a quick reminder, if you're signing up for the Twitter dinner tomorrow night, it's on Eventbrite. So it's Twitter at Mobile Road Fellowship. Just be a publisher or an advertiser. There's no vendors there. And I think that's going to be it. I'll leave the YuChiang.
Hello. Okay, well, we're going to have a really good panel today. As Dave mentioned, there are no vendors on here, and we're going to tell them the closest to the truth as we can for everything. Across the board here, you see people who spend, say, probably together, we spend a couple $100 million in UA a year in spend in advertising and paid for. So there's a lot of experience here on getting users, budgeting, and trying to attract the most users you can to your applications. We're going to start off with a really quick question from you guys. So if you can raise your hand, it'd be really helpful for us. How many of you guys here have your own app and you're trying to acquire users for those apps? Can you raise your hand? Okay, that's helpful. And then how many of you guys have an app that is not in gaming? Can you raise your hand? Okay. All right, well, we know what we should talk about then. So. Okay, so I think the best place to start actually is for us to describe for you guys just what the basics of user acquisition on mobile is and what those tools are. So Scott's going to do a quick rundown of what the stack is for us.
Sure. Hi, I'm Scott. I think it looks like we've got maybe 50% of the people in here are not in the game sector, so that's good. We up here, like you said, spend a lot of money, and we need to know where we're spending that money, how effectively we're spending that money. So the whole point of this panel is to talk about those tools. And we'll get into more detail, but I'm going to assume that everyone here knows nothing. I know that's not true. I see a lot of colleagues out there, but the main idea behind UA is you want to spend some money and you want to get that money back eventually, preferably sooner rather than later. So there's a bunch of tools that we're using in the user acquisition space to make sure we're able to track that and understand essentially the ROI of our ad spend. So very high level, you have to have a couple of things. You have to have a good app, right? And even with the best app out there, you can't just put it out there and walk away. So you have to spend some money. You have to have a budget, and that budget then has to be tracked. So you have to be able to understand where you're spending your money. That could be done through manual processes by an in-house UA team or an agency, something like that. And you can then need to track all the installs you get, right? So you spend X amount of dollars per install or per impression or whatever that is. You need to be able to understand how many installs you're getting for that spend. And ultimately, you then need some sort of tracking solution in-house or external third-party solution that will allow you to really understand the value of those individual users. So you can look at, we'll talk about the individual tracking partners, but in-house, for example, we have a database where we track pretty much every event within our games, and including monetization events. We are able to then tie that back to every ad dollar that we spend and understand, are we making our money back, are we spending appropriately or not, etc. So there's a bunch of pieces to that puzzle, very high level. You want to know what your ROI is, right? You want to be able to spend money, figure out if you get that money back. So I think we're going to go into detail about the individual tools.
Yeah, so the question then for me, to you guys, since you guys use all the tools, and we'll pretend the vendors don't hear this conversation, because there's a lot of noise out there, right? Because it's a really new space right now, especially around tracking. I think the big changes to Facebook and who they allow to track the data and who they don't allow, especially 6 months ago, made a lot of people shift their strategies. But there's also big pricing differences, and there's other things going on as to how effective they are at tracking and who actually is accurate and who's not. So what I'd like you guys to do is just sort of kind of go down the line here and talk a little bit about the vendors that are out there and what makes them different. Why you would choose to use some of them and not choose some of them. The big names that I have here on my list, at least, that most people are considering are Kochava, Tune, AppSolar, AppsFlyer, and Adjust. So that's probably where we'll center around this conversation.
Hi. So for FunPlus, we use Kochava and Adjust. And I see Charles out there, CEO of Kochava. Hi. The reason that we chose them is because of the downtime. We actually tested 4 different third-party tracking partners, and we decided on Kochava and Adjust. It's downtime, the accuracy, and they're available to actually service us. We have about 26 million MAUs, 6 million DAUs, so we process a lot of data, close to 2.4 billion events a day. So when you capture that sort of a volume of events, you want to go out with the partners that actually can deliver. So that's why we chose Adjust and Kochava.
So I do a lot of consulting with Wargaming right now, and we just launched our first mobile app for that company. We use mobile app tracking or Tune for our tracking with them, and we found them to be very reliable and have good international coverage, which was important for us. We're a fully localized app all around the world, and so having the tool set where we can go and track ads in Russia, in China, in Japan, in the US was very important for us, and they had a good framework for that.
So I'm Yonamine with MobilityWare, and we use Kochava and Addix as our 2 attribution providers. It was sort of a technical decision on our standpoint to use 2 different ones. We looked at some of the others, and obviously there are some that don't support Facebook, so we eliminated those. But within the realm of the other possibilities, we tried to pick the ones that we thought were larger and technically implemented more effectively than the others.
Yeah, so I wanted to add one thing, because I'm assuming everyone out there knows nothing, even though I know that's not true. I wanted to give a little detail on what it is we're talking about, who these partners are. So the tracking partners, like YuChiang said, there's a handful of them out there. Essentially what they do is you send all of your traffic through them, and they tell you where your installs came from. So they track installs for you. They also track other events. They'll track clicks, they'll track revenue events, all of that kind of thing. So they can associate that information to different partners, different ad networks, or DSPs, whatever it is you're using. On our end, we also do use Kochava, but I think one thing I've been asked this question many times, just from people out in the industry, who should I use? And there are pluses and minuses to each of these partners, but at the end of the day, it really depends on your needs. The products are very similar in what they do. Some of them do a lot more on the analytics side and presenting your data. Some of them have less analytics. For us specifically, at the end of the day, what was most important to us in our decision is the ability to pull all of the data back into our system. So we have a database that we use to track all of our events. We want to be able to tie that data back. So we tap into Kochava's API and pull all of that data into our systems to allow us to do internal reporting, ROI measurements.
Yeah, so the complaints I hear a lot about these tracking systems, I'm just going to name them off, and it's not specific to any vendor, but things that people find to be troublesome, right? So the first is account management. There's like a rotating team of account managers for each of these companies, and it seems like they switch them out every 6 months, and you have to bring a new person up to speed, and they don't know anything about your business, and you got to do it again. So the first thing I'd be really careful about is just, is this company going to be around for a while? Do they have a team that's going to be there for a while? Do you need to bring them up to speed? The other thing that I hear a lot from from this group, is pricing and accuracy. So I'd love you guys to hit upon some of that for us. You know, the pricing I think is getting competitive, but there's definitely different types of ways of charging you, which we should talk about here. So why don't we just start there, Rob?
Sure. So I think the important thing for people to remember or realize what we're talking about, we're not talking about the pricing per app install. This has nothing to do with the actual, what you're paying to get that user from an ad network. We're talking about the pricing for tracking that app install. So it's somewhat different, and the pricing tends to be fairly insignificant. Usually it's like half a cent per event track or something like that. So very small incremental amounts, but if you're talking about 10,000 or 100,000 DAU, the price can get somewhat significant. So what you're usually looking at with these vendors is tracking how many events are you tracking. So you usually pay per event tracked. So did the user install the app? Did they open the app? Did they finish your tutorial? Did they monetize? And as a developer, you can choose how many of those events that you want to track, but you're going to pay for every one of them. So these tracking platforms, they're not really a good replacement for your metrics tool, because with metrics you want to track everything that the user is doing so that you can reference it and learn from it. But with these install tracking, you want to limit it to kind of the high KPI return events. So things like in-app purchase, tutorial completion, social sharing, things like that.
Yeah, what's also you got to look for in the pricing for these providers is how long the contract they're trying to lock you into. So, you don't know how well it's going to work based on your implementation, but also like how quickly you can get the results from them. Is it real time? What's the discrepancy between your internal tracking and their tracking, or the ad partner that you're buying from? So it's really important that you get at least some type of out or some type of ability to get out if it's not working for you. And what's interesting is a lot of them are starting to try to sign you up for 1-year, 2-year contracts because they want to be sustainable businesses. But that's actually not really always in your best interest.
One comment on that that I think is really important and something we didn't explicitly say, but again, the ultimate goal of all of this is for us to make some money, right? And so what you need to do is find value in that product. So if we're talking specifically about the attribution partners and those guys, you need to figure out how does that help me make more money or save money some way. And so going back about 2.5, 3 years now, I was at a company called TinyCo, and this is kind of before any of the Cochavas and Has offers were really big out there. I'll keep it short. The short version is we found that roughly 30% of our ad spend was actually duplicate ad spend. In other words, multiple ad partners, multiple ad networks were charging us for one install. So that was sort of the birth of these companies who then said, hey, look, we can tell you who the last ad network was, or the first ad network, whatever your was, to show that user your ad, and therefore you can pay that user and not the others. And that's where we really initially found the value in these partners.
Yeah, so this might be a good time to go down the line here and talk a little bit about the discrepancies in reporting and what percentage you guys are seeing, the difference between sort of your internal reporting, the third-party tracking, and then who's actually buying the ad for you.
Yes. So kind of follow up on Scott's point. We have a couple of partners that is actually north of 30% discrepancy, and that's due to the look-back windows. So some partners, and I don't want to really name names, but some big partners, they will actually lock you into a 28-day look-back window or a 21-day look-back window after a click event happened. So if you get into a contract like that, let's say partner X, the install clicks from partner X, and then attributes Coachella or adjust attributes to that install to the partner X, and then partner Y comes in with a 21-day look-back window and attributes that install to themselves after day 14. So you are in a dilemma right now. You have to double pay for that install. So you need to make sure that your tracking partner is aware, either Coachella, Adjust, or whoever you're working with, and your IO or the contract that you're signing with your install partner actually clearly discloses what's the loop-back window. So, like I said, I mentioned a couple of times that Facebook has a totally different look back algorithm, which looks back on clicks and views, which we're trying to change, and hopefully, they will come around and change this. But just be careful and be careful what you're signing, and make sure that your look back windows on your partners is, most of our partners are 72 hours. So.
Yeah, you should get a really short one.
Exactly.
Dave, what type of discrepancy do you see?
We see about the same thing, about a 30% discrepancy. And, between the attribution vendors and Flory and other ad networks that we use, they're all different, and they each want to use their own metrics for counting and billing purposes. So it's tough. You have to sort of keep track of all of them, and you're never really happy with any of them.
Yeah, 30% is large though, right? That's like the difference of a campaign being profitable for you and not being profitable.
Yeah, so I think what it comes down to at this point, because I don't know if the technology is there to really back you up as a developer, but you do need to go, look at your what your provider says that they provided you, how many installs they said they gave you, what they're billing you for, and then look at your attribution partner and see what the truth is there, and try to, maybe you need to go back to your ad partner and negotiate with them and say, well, you say you sent me 1,000, I say you only sent 700. There's a 300 install discrepancy there. What can we do to kind of true that up? And right now, I think that's kind of a manual process for most developers, but it can definitely save you a lot of money and prevent these ad networks from doing that double billing, from going in and hitting you for it.
And correct me if I'm wrong, Rob, but a lot of the ad partners and people you buy inventory, especially CPI, right? Only basically CPI. You can take a third-party data, like from Kochava or Just, and actually show it to them, and they'll actually pay CPI based just on that data. Is that correct?
That's based on your negotiation. So that it depends on what's in your contract. So when you go in and sign what you're agreeing to, and a lot of times it's just an online click here and agree to the terms. Unfortunately, it's one of those times where you do need to actually go through and read those 20 pages of online information before you check the box and click it. But as a developer, in the end, you have the power. If they're ripping you off, if you don't like the results you're seeing, don't buy with them. But you do need to check on that, and most developers will accept a creditable third party for it.
Okay, we're going to move on to the next part here. So just a quick raise of hands from you four here. For you four, which one of you guys is Facebook still the majority of your user acquisition? So the demise of Facebook is not true. Okay, so the second part of that question is, okay, excluding Facebook. Now, what is your second source of traffic? And we'll start with you, Dave.
Okay, I guess for us, our number 2 network would be ChartBoost. And I guess the question is why, right? And for us, the pluses on ChartBoost is that they have, they provide the advertiser with better control in a lot of the circumstances than some of the other networks do. They offer the ability to do direct deals with other app developers, and the evidence isn't that clear with us here, but it looks like some of their users on the average might be a little bit better. And then, we'll get to the cons later on.
So I'm a former Tapjoy person, so I know how to use their network very well, and used properly, I can get some very good quality installs from it. I think beyond just individual networks, we're getting to a point now where using the aggregator networks, using folks like AppFX and Grow Mobile and some of these companies that are bringing in Fixu, bringing all these ad networks together, it's almost becoming a necessity, because last I heard there's 250 ad networks out there right now that have decent traffic. It's almost impossible to be negotiating and running and shutting off campaigns on all of those at the same time. So I think you need these aggregators to be able to effectively run traffic that's not on Facebook. So that would be where I would go right now outside of Facebook.
We have different UA operations in different sides of the world. So for US and Western markets, we have ChartBoost, Tapjoy, we work with Tapjoy, AppFX. On the Southeast Asia part, we work with Line and WeChat. So depending on where you're actually operating, it kind of differentiates who you're working with.
Yeah, so again, Facebook is huge. I specifically am in the social casino world, and personally I think there's a big difference between potentially games and non-games, and even within games, social casino, there are some networks who are kind of specializing in that. So obviously Google is a huge one for people in general. I can't use Google at all. Their policies don't allow even social casinos to advertise there. But outside of that, I would recommend everybody talk to them, or some of the people who will do Google buying on your behalf, like a Get It Mobile or something like that. On my front, we use a couple of networks, kind of, I'll call them second and third place, our ties. Some in the video space, so like an Ad Colony, Bungle, those kind of guys are really good. They drive great quality users. The users are not just clicking on a banner ad, and so they watch a video to understand what the app is that they're going to download potentially, and if they don't click to download, then you're not getting a poor quality user in. But you typically pay for video view, not for an install. Although some of these guys are now coming out with CPI products where you're paying for it, which is great. And then additionally on our side, specific to social casino, there's a couple of networks like AppLovin who are kind of focused in that genre and do a really good job. Then we work with a lot of DSPs as well, like the RTB.com, those kind of guys.
So another quick show of hands here. How many of you four up here actually do any sort of burst acquisition? You could raise your hand. Okay, so it's definitely a mix of burst advertising to get some organics, and then you use the other networks to maintain your rank and try to get good quality users. So that's generally a strategy that most people are using, even to this day. I'm going to insert a new question here, which is, we talked a little bit about the tracking software. We talked a little bit about channels that you acquire users from. A question that I'm wondering is, what do you guys use for analyzing your app itself, the data analytics? Who do you like? Who do you think is something that is affordable or that is easy to implement? Because I know a bunch of tech guys hate implementing a lot of analytics. So let me start with you, Scott.
Sure. I have in the past used the Contagions or Upsites, Flurry. A lot of the companies do analytics. I think at a certain point, depending on the size of your company or the volume, a lot of companies consider bringing it in-house, and that's something that we've done. So we actually don't work with any of the third-party providers specifically for analytics, other than the attribution partners who do provide some insights back to us. So all of our stuff is done in-house. We use a Vertica database with Tableau sitting on top of that for BI reporting. Yeah.
Yeah, it's us as well. It's just quite similar setup since I worked at Idle Games before, and kind of we are doing this similar setup in FunPlus. We don't have any external partners. We only use the third-party attribution partners for install, clicks and install. And every other data we process in-house. I have a 12-man BI and analytics team, 6 engineers and 5 analysts and 1 PM, basically running everything in-house. We process a lot of data. We have quite a number of payers, and the reason that we went in-house is that we did not want to share this data, although we do trust all these third-party providers out there. We did not want to share the data, the payers data or progression data, retained users data that we have in different games with outside. So we have a very similar Amazon Redshift setup. We're migrating things to Hive and Spark right now because of the size of the data, and we're trying to kind of scale up. And we hit a problem with one of our games that has about 4 million DAUs, and but we have everything internal.
Yeah, as you can see, it's really important because for UA, I think what a lot of people forget is that basically if you can get better analytics and increase the ARPU of each user or the retention of it, then you can pay more and you can do more UA. So that's why it's key. Rob?
So I think it's great if you have the funds and the manpower available to build out your own internal data tracking. That's usually fairly difficult for a lot of smaller developers. I've worked with Upsite a good bit. I think they have a great product. It's a bit expensive. For small developers that I've worked with, I've used a company called Fusebox a good bit, and they have a free ad-driven metrics product, which is really nice for a developer that doesn't have a big budget. I've worked with some folks like Mixpanel, and had, varying results with them. I found their tool is a little bit too narrow. Didn't have a really good broad analytics package behind it, which is what we're looking for. I think if you're looking for something inexpensive, I like Fusebox a lot. If you've got some budget to put behind it, I think Upsite is really good.
So at MobilityWare, we're in the process of bringing the analytics in-house, but currently we use Flurry and some other internal things. So Flurry for developers that aren't very large, I think is a good starting point because it's easy to implement and it doesn't cost you anything. The product has some issues at times, and so there are limitations there. But again, it's certainly better than not having anything.
So one more point, we actually didn't explicitly say it, but for a lot of the developers out there, I'm sure there's a lot of guys out there who have much smaller budgets than what we're working with up here. And so ultimately UA comes down to a cash flow issue, right? And so these tools, that whether it's in-house or third party, one of the most important things you can do is find somebody who's going to give you an accurate estimate of a lifetime value of a user, or at least a day 90, day 180 estimate, something like that, so that you can understand when you're going to get your money back from spending X dollars on ad spend. Hope that makes sense.
It does. So it brings up an interesting case. Two of you mentioned that you want to bring it in-house because you want to control the data. Well, what's interesting to me is when you buy on the UA side, and also when you do things like Kochava and stuff, you're sending out where you get your users, where it's most effective to get your users from, and most of you guys, I guess, you're sending back install data and also at least some type of monetization event at the end. So the question is, does that worry you that somebody else has that information?
Sure. Well, go quick. 2 years ago, yes. Nowadays, much less so. So not that a whole lot has changed, other than some of these companies have matured and evolved. We used to be scared to send almost any data out to third parties. Nowadays, I do send revenue events to some of these third-party networks in the hopes and promise that they can start spending money more appropriately, right? So ROI-driven user acquisition rather than just CPI-based.
And has that proven out? Are you getting better results?
In some cases, yes, and others, no. I'll leave it at that for now.
So we are trying a different approach, and we are not sending any data back to any of our partners, except the click and installs data. But we have given some access to some of our partners, Tableau access to some of our partners where they can track their installs. So we do create custom KPI reports for them, and we let them come into our dashboard, Tableau dashboard, web Tableau dashboard, and track their performance based on their sources that they are pushing installs from. And we have all the way to the pub ID level tracking. So they can come in, they can check their retention, they can check their ROI, they can check their 30-day yield, 60-day yield, 90-day yield. Everything that we can see, they can check. So although it's not on a UID base, the reports give them an aggregate information of how they are performing. And we are basing our information on that specific report. So when we have a discussion every week, hey, you're not really performing well, and when we say you're not really performing well, we mean retention. Look at your day 1 and day 3 retention. They can actually look at the report and see it themselves.
I think an important thing to remember with these ad attribution networks, you get the value out of them when you give them the data back. You've gone through and presumably vetted this company. You know that they're going to use your data to help build out their network, to make their network more powerful. They're not going to go sell your data. If you don't trust these people to do that, then you shouldn't be working with them. But once you have that level of trust, when you send your data back to them, when you send them the user information, the user history and demographics, whatever you send back to them, that allows them to purchase for you more effectively. So they're able to build a better advertising install picture, thank you, of what you want, what performs best for you, which users are your highest monetizing, which users are your highest retaining. And they can only do that if you're sending that information back to them. So you do have to have a certain level of trust with your third-party providers. But the more you send back, the better they can perform for you. I think that's something that's kind of important to remember in all this. So nobody wants to just give up all their information. You know, I don't really want anybody to know about all of my purchase histories and all my user data and whatnot. But if I give that to a provider, they can then build a blacklist or a whitelist for me, and that's going to help me get better installs.